Mr Clarke-Smith was elected as MP for Bassetlaw in 2019, a seat that had been Labour since the 30s, and you credit Mr Johnson for that win, I know. How do you respond, first of all, to Louise Bennett?
Well, first of all, I'm very sorry to hear about Fred, and you have my sympathy. And as a parent, I can imagine it must be the absolute worst thing in the world. I was bereaved during COVID as well.
Exacerbated by the fact that the Prime Minister was lying to.
But as was, of course, Boris Johnson. He spent time in ICU himself, of course. I'm sure he completely understands. But again, exactly what this is about today. This is about Parliament in particular. And, we're not re-examining COVID as a whole. Lots of tragedies happened during COVID all around the world. It's a terrible thing, of course, and we tried our best with that.
Do you want to say anything about the fact that the committee, the report, which Boris Johnson has called a lie, you have called the report spiteful, vindictive, and the committee a kangaroo court? I mean, why are you indulging in what the committee calls a campaign of abuse and intimidation?
Well, I'd say they've overreached as well there. And again, it was very specific parameters. They were looking at what he said in Parliament. Now, Boris Johnson, he's given evidence to the committee. He's sent evidence in there as well. And he's been very clear.
And they decided he lied. He misled on 9 occasions.
But unless they've got a crystal ball, how they can know that he intentionally did that, I don't know. I don't know what other people are thinking, of course, and what Boris Johnson said.
Have you read this report?
I have, and the information that Boris Johnson was given by people who he'd asked for that and he was briefed on. Now, this happens all the time with ministers where they will go to the dispatch box, they will give a statement on something, and sometimes the facts will change later on. They'll find out extra information, they will come to the dispatch box, they will correct the record, as Boris Johnson did.
He didn't do that, according to this report. He didn't do that.
Well, Boris Johnson corrected the record at least a couple of times.
No, not according to the committee's report today. Are you sure you've read it?
Well, which specific bit are we referring to that he didn't correct?
They said he purported to come to the Commons and correct the statement. But they weren't satisfied he had. That was another contempt.
Well, I've sat in the House myself where Boris Johnson has stated quite clearly that things had gone off in Downing Street. He apologised for that. Of course, there was all the furore about the FPN, which he accepted. Of course, the Metropolitan Police only considered that one event there counted that fine.
This is about lying. We're not talking about Partygates and fines now. This is about lying. Anti-democratic, Mr Johnson called it. I don't know if you agree with that.
Well, it's not a case of whether it's democratic or not. I mean, democratic to elect your MPs, obviously, and it's the public who decide where we are. But what you expect is a fair hearing. You expect people to go into that without any prejudice before you start, and you expect to be able to give evidence and for it to be considered. Now,
which he did.
Well, the chair of that committee already had to recuse himself. The chair that was appointed afterwards has already been found to make comments prejudging Boris Johnson as well.
Mr Johnson had multiple occasions to give evidence. He presented written evidence, he presented oral evidence, he had 250 grand of taxpayers' money to pay for his lawyers, even though he's earned £6 million since September. I mean, you're not saying he's a victim here, are you?
Well, I wouldn't have had the inquiry in the first place, quite frankly, because I think
that wasn't the question.
Well, I mean, the point is he is entitled to defend himself.
And he has. What was my question?
Well, he's entitled to defend himself with the facts that are there. He's very forthcoming towards the committee. He does not feel he has been treated fairly. Now, if you look at his statement that he said, he's identified a number of areas where he doesn't feel that process has been followed correctly, where they've gone outside the original remit with the definitions and so on. And then he's also raised specific questions about the committee itself. Now, if I were Boris Johnson, I'd want all those addressed. Now, he's resigned as an MP. He's already gone now.
Yeah. So he's avoided democracy, actually. He's chosen not to put his case to you and your colleagues in the House on Monday, and he's chosen not to face voters in his own constituency. That's how much he likes democracy.
Well, he agreed to this on the basis that he thought he would get fair treatment, and when he saw the report, he felt that that was not the case and it wouldn't be possible to actually do that.
When the committee finds he deliberately misled, he decides, oh no, I think this is an unfair process.
But the committee again has changed. They've changed from the number of days. Even today, we've heard they've added extra on for criticising the committee. Now, as a parliamentarian, you expect to be able to scrutinise, you expect to be able to object, to be able to debate. If you're not going to able to...
Not trash it, though.
Well, not trash it, no, and we accept they've got a very difficult job to do on these committees. I have a lot of respect for people who do it.
You're calling them a kangaroo court. Don't be disingenuous. Well, you don't have respect for them.
Well, I said I'd read the report first. I did that. I read the report when it was published, and then when I've looked into it. And if we're talking about courts, Victoria, if this were a real court of law, this would have been thrown out straight away. There is no way, on the basis that this has been set up, in terms of how it's decided, in terms of the evidence is there, that this would pass the threshold.
You're a member of the House of Commons. Parliament instructed the committee to do this. Boris Johnson set the Privileges Committee up. There is a debate and a vote on Monday on the report. You'll be voting against it.
I certainly will, yes.
Why don't you want to stand up for honesty and integrity in public life?
Well, that's what I feel as I'm doing. Now, the easiest thing in the world would be for me to either not be there on Monday or to nod it through. Instead, I'm standing up for what I think is right. And I think when you actually stand by people, that's when it actually shows some real integrity, because what we're doing is defending colleagues. Now, if it were another colleague in the House of Commons who had the same thing, I would expect them to get a fair hearing as well. I don't believe Boris Johnson has.
Those Conservative colleagues that vote for this report on Monday, assuming they turn up, should they face deselection, as Nadine Dorries has suggested?
Well, it's a free vote, and I think it should stay a free vote. It's a House matter, it's not a party political matter.
Should they face deselection in their constituencies?
No. I mean, I think it's for individual constituencies to speak to their members of Parliament about how they feel, about what promises they've made, and about what they think is reasonable and with their own consciences. So I would never go as far as saying that, no. But what I would say is that I think they should look at it. I think they should make their own decision on it. And certainly I would urge them to vote against this, because I do think it has gone too far. I think it is spiteful and vindictive. Taking his parliamentary pass away from him as a former Prime Minister is quite unprecedented.
Yeah, because he was a Prime Minister and he misled the House and the country. That's why they're suggesting a suspension of 90 days and removing the pass. It's all the more serious, the committee said, because he was the Prime Minister.
But of course, most of this is for the criticism of the committee. Margaret Ferrier, of course, only had 30 days suspension. This is I think it's the second biggest one they've ever issued.
Yeah, this was the Prime Minister of the country, lying to the country on multiple occasions.
But they've not provided a single shred of evidence to say that Boris Johnson knowingly did this. Now, they can surmise and they can suggest that he's done it, and they can put forward and repeat it a lot. And most of us have seen this in Twitter over recent weeks. So when we talk about confidentiality, I think there's certainly an issue there as well. I don't believe Boris Johnson did. I think he said, to the best of his abilities and what he'd been provided with, I think he corrected the letter later. And I hope on Monday this will be voted down, and I'll certainly be encouraging colleagues to do that.
Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.